When they invested me, and that's the formal term, when they invested me in Archon, the expectation, there's many expectations, but it's not a lifetime achievement award. You'll hear about this in a minute. And it used to be viewed that way, frankly. And there's about a 5-minute video to start this presentation, which I will let run, and I won't be repetitive. So you can hear about what an Archon is from the national commander and from others in the Archon organization. And then I will jump in and we can have more of a conversation, and I'll go through the presentation. But the expectations that are put on us are not only to espouse on behalf of the ecumenical patriarchate, but to educate our own faithful people on what is happening. What is happening in our church? We take many things for granted in this country, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So I will start with this short 5-minute video. I realize I'm the one standing between you and kickoff, so we've got some time. We'll try and keep this going. I encourage you to ask questions as we go along. I don't like standing behind a podium and talking for an hour and then waiting for people to ask. Stop me anytime you want to stop me. It's a conversation. We're all friends and family here. So let's start with the next slide. Yeah, and we can do more.
An Archon is a term used for leader. In fact, it originated in the 8th century BC when it referred to the ancient leaders of the city of Athens, the first democracy. The Order of St. Andrew, unlike any other organization in the world, has a singular focus, a laser focus on the well-being and the religious freedom of the ecumenical patriarchate of Constantinople, the spiritual center of the world's 300 million Orthodox Christians. We are comprised of archons. What is an archon?
Well, Archon actually comes from the ancient Greek world. It means leader, the one from the beginning. So it's an ancient Greek title. And it's probably the oldest honor in Christendom.
The role of the Archon in the function of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese and the metropolises is very, very significant. Virtually every major position of the Archdiocese held by a layman is held by an Archon of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. And it's good that they're led by Archons, because that Archon always has in the back of his mind to promote the Mother Church. And in that context, when you promote the Mother Church, you're also promoting its most important eparchy, the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America.
So basically the traits of an Archon go back to the Lord and Savior first. He said the greatest leader amongst you will be the greatest servant. So we look for service from an Archon. We want from his wisdom, and we want from his vision of the church and how he serves the church.
And it was founded and originated by Archbishop Iakovos of blessed memory, who was the Exarch or representative of the Ecumenical Patriarch. And in this case, in 1966, the Ecumenical Patriarch was Athenagoras, the great Athenagoras. So at that time, he conferred the title of Archon to 30 individuals, men, who were distinguished leaders of the church, who exemplified their Christian stewardship at the local level, at the diocese level, at the archdiocese level.
Ultimately, you want somebody who's a servant leader. And if they do that, they're thinking of their brother and their sister, they're thinking of the community, they're thinking of the mother church, they're thinking of the archdiocese, and they're looking at everybody as a church family.
So I have had the great honor and privilege to serve as the national commander since 1998, when Archbishop Spiridon appointed me. And I serve at the pleasure of the Exarch, the Archbishop of America, now Archbishop Elpidophoros of America. But in 1998, when I became the national commander, I have to say, with humility and great pride in the Archon team that we've assembled, that there was a metamorphosis that took place in the order. It really morphed into an honorific organization which recognized the achievements of great laymen in the church, almost a lifetime achievement award status, if you will, to a dynamic, active, some people say hyperactive organization in which we developed initiatives domestically in the United States and internationally around the world to promote the religious freedom of the ecumenical patriarchate. What do you mean by religious freedom? Well, the government of Turkey does not even recognize the ecumenical patriarchate from a legal perspective. It has no corporate identity. So if you don't exist in the eyes of the government, you have no rights.
We have a religious freedom objective. So the first thing is to make sure that the ecumenical patriarchate has the support of what we hope is the United States government. We bring it to the attention of our brothers and sisters in America. America is still the land of the free and the home of the brave. So we ask them to speak about freedom bravely and talk about what religious freedom means for us in Constantinople and other parts of the Orthodox world. That's one of the elements. The other thing is that we ask them to use their resources. So therefore, we ask them to support the Ecumenical Patriarchate. We've established the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew Foundation to secure the financial future of the Ecumenical Patriarchate around the world. When you're talking about becoming an Archon, it should not just simply be what you did. It's what you're doing. And that has really been developed in the past 10 years by Dr. Limbarakis and the National Council of the Order of St. Andrew.
And finally, the constant recruitment of our children and grandchildren, raising them up in the church, passing the baton to them, to become ambassadors of the Ecumenical Patriarch. Archons are ambassadors, they are soldiers. And the two together result in the strengthening of the Mother Church here in the United States, the most important eparchy of the Mother Church, because the United States is the most powerful country in the world. And by virtue of that, we're able to support the Mother Church with the full backing of our U.S. government. So those are all positive things that we envision will continue over the generations to come, God willing.
So before I move on, any questions on all of that? I mean, did that do a pretty good job of letting people know what the Archons are about? Yes, Mark.
Yeah, so basically,
Sorry, George wanted me to take a pause because he is, and my thanks actually to George Psefteas who's recording this, because a number of people couldn't come live and they wanted to see this on YouTube. So George wanted me to pause so he can get you a microphone. So here's the microphone.
Yeah, so basically, when you're is it an induction?
Invested. It's an investiture.
An investiture.
Yeah.
So once an Archon, always an Archon.
Unless I do something to
get thrown out.
To have the lay version of a defrockment, yes.
Yeah.
Once an Archon, always.
And is there a limit on the number of Archons there are, or?
I don't think that there's a quota per se or a limit. Every year they look to invest somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 from each metropolis. So if you think about that, that's, we have 8 metropolises plus our direct archdiocesan district. So you're looking at maybe 200, well, actually that's, let me back up. 30 in total for the entire archdiocese, 30 to 40 for the entire archdiocese. So maybe 5 or so. 4 to 5 or so from each metropolis. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I apologize. Yeah, 270 a year. There's roughly 700 or so. I don't know the exact number. There's roughly 700 across the country today. Unfortunately, a lot of our brother Archons are getting up in years, and we've lost a number of them over the past number of years. So the order is really trying to continue to keep our numbers to that level. But there's no actual quota.
When an Archon dies, say several die in a year, do they make up for the ones that have passed on?
Yeah, I don't think that they actually make up for them. I'm speaking somewhat out of turn because I don't know all the workings of the National Council. Like I said, they try and make sure they get 35 to 40 in years where the numbers are really high, they might look to bring in 30 or 35. In other years, they might look to bring in closer to 40. Now, it really depends on the individuals that are putting forward their nomination. So the way you become an Archon, it used to be that your priest or another Archon, a hierarch, would nominate you, right? And they changed that in the last number of years. They encourage individuals to nominate themselves, which is a very hard thing to do. I've been encouraged to nominate myself for a number of years, and I kept saying no for a number of years for a variety of different reasons. But a group of people approached me and said, look, given all the work that you're doing, it is deserving. And so put your name forward, and if you're not worthy from the standpoint of those that need to vet you, you'll know. So I did, and it does go through. You have to get a blessing from your parish priest. You have to get a blessing from your hierarch in your metropolis. You have to get endorsed by another Archon. So you have a nominating Archon, you have an endorsing Archon. So you go through, and then it goes to the National Council, and they make a decision, and they put that decision forward literally to His All Holiness. So there's a list that goes to the Patriarch. And once the Patriarch blesses it, then you are qualified for investiture as an Archon. So that's what happens. Yeah.
Can only men be Archons?
At this point, yes, it's only men. But there has been discussion, and discussion continues on perhaps changing that. So I don't know how long that discussion has been taking place. I don't know how much more discussion needs to take place, and I don't know if it will ever change, but I do know that discussions are happening to talk about that. Someone else had their hand up. Nick? And then, and I'm sorry I don't remember your name.
Is there a financial obligation on your part to be an Archon?
Is there a
financial obligation?
No, there is no financial obligation. There is no financial obligation. The part of the credentials, or I shouldn't say credentials, part of what they look for is above and beyond service at your parish level, above and beyond service at your metropolis, above and beyond service at your archdiocese. And those are the key criteria. Now, I will tell you, because our brothers in the East are a little more blunt than we tend to be here in the West. When I went to what they call Archon Boot Camp, which was back in October, it was made very clear to us that if you're an individual who does not have financial means, that's okay. That's not why you're here. Do what you can do to support the Patriarchate and the Church. If you are an individual that has some financial means, shame on you if you don't give your first fruits to God. And it was actually said exactly that way, with a finger pointed at us too, by the way. So I won't say that there's definitely not an obligation, but there's an expectation that if we can help with time, talent, and treasure, that we do help with time, talent, and treasure.
You just gave Darius some ideas for stewardship.
Okay. So the next few slides are pretty meaty, and we can probably spend an entire afternoon on each slide. And I have to be very careful because I have both a very well-educated and qualified priest and deacon in the room. What I'm about to tell you is high-level stuff. It's at the surface. But we're going to talk a little bit about the church itself. So, and I think everybody knows this, right? So, for the first 1,000 years of history, we were one Christian church. Christianity was Christianity. There was no denomination. There was no religion per se, like we say today. Oh, what faith are you? Oh, what denomination are you? That didn't exist. Christianity was one and undivided. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how that changed. And we hear words in our own creed when we say one holy Catholic and apostolic church. What do we mean by that? Why do we say apostolic? Well, so let's start talking about the Pentarchy a little bit, right? So has anyone heard of the term Pentarchy? Okay, so I won't spend a ton of time on this, but the ancient patriarchates, the ancient church, was split up really into, I shouldn't even call it split. There were 5 regions, I'll put it that way, right? Because you have to think of what the world looked like back in those days, right? In the early church, in the years after Christ, in the early years of the apostles, when the Holy Spirit guided them out to go to the far reaches to preach the word. So we all know of Rome, and we attribute the founding of Rome to St. Peter. We attribute the founding of the church in Constantinople to St. Andrew, and so on and so forth. Jerusalem are the apostles as a whole, because that's where it all began. Alexandria, St. Mark. Antioch, Saints Peter and Paul. Now, this is where you really need to spend some time looking and reading and understanding the history. It's, they say that St. Peter was the first bishop of Rome. Well, I mean, if you read the texts, if you read the history, there's no place that actually says St. Peter was the bishop of Rome. If you go back and look at the ancient texts, if you look at the ancient writings of St. John Chrysostom, of St. Gregory the theologian, they don't refer to St. Andrew as the first bishop of Constantinople. So there's a lot here, right? But St. Andrew, from the standpoint of Constantinople, St. Andrew did travel to Byzantium back in roughly the year 38 or 39. St. Andrew, who was the first called apostle, St. Andrew did, I won't say ordain, but I will say assign or appoint Psefteas, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, the apostle, one of the 70, to be the first bishop of Constantinople, then Byzantium, then Constantinople. So when we say apostolic churches, these are the apostolic churches because they have been viewed to have been founded, to have their roots in the visit of or an actual founding from the apostles of Christ. When you look at other churches like the Church of Serbia, the Church of Bulgaria, the Church of Romania, those are all valid churches, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But these are the apostolic churches. Why Catholic? Because it's universal. The word Catholic means universal. So one universal apostolic church. So what happens next? Now we get to this year. Does anybody know the significance of this year? George?
The split.
The schism, right? So, okay, so there, I'll get the graphic to go. So, okay. So we were unified until the 11th century. Now, again, the history is complex here. The seeds of what happened in the year 1054 really began much earlier, right? Over the course of centuries, there were disagreements over the years from the church in the west, which was Rome, and the church in the east, which was Constantinople. Now, everybody knows their history. The Emperor Constantine, who founded the city that now bears his name, or that then bared his name, Constantinople, that was New Rome. That was New Rome. The capital was actually moved from Rome to Constantinople. But there was a patriarch or a pope, right? Now, the word pope means father, right? So let's remember that too. You know, people are like, oh, we have a patriarch, they have a pope. It's the same thing. I mean, really, at the end of the day, the pope is a father. So, but there were political grievances. There were some liturgical grievances. And that brewed over the course of centuries. So 1054 is when the actual act of excommunication took place. So I think it was Humbert or Hubert, I can't remember, one of the cardinals, you know, as part of a three-person delegation from Pope Leo the 9th or 10th in Rome. That delegation came to Constantinople and put a bull of excommunication on the holy altar at Hagia Sophia. And basically we're done with you, right? Now, that wasn't the actual end, I will say. There was probably some from reading that I've done, there were some back and forth discussions probably over the next couple hundred years, close to a couple hundred years. But in the early 13th century, in the early 1200s, when the Fourth Crusade took place and the Latins sacked Constantinople, that was it. It's like, okay, we're done, right? And it's unfortunate. But for purposes of our discussion, there were a lot of reasons I'm not going to go into. For purposes of our discussion, I'm going to attribute the schism to two main things. One is papal primacy, and the other one is this filioque clause, right, that we hear about. So papal primacy, we all know that, you know, when the Pope speaks today, in the view of the Roman Catholics and the Western Church, he's infallible in his communications when speaking about church, what happens in the Roman Catholic Church, church doctrine. We don't believe in infallibility. We believe in the first among equals, right? And even before the church split, Rome was viewed as the first among equals in the Pentarchy. Why? Because the attribution of St. Peter, right, who was the head of the apostles, who Christ said, on you I will build my church, on this rock I will build my church. So as one church, we always viewed Rome to be the first among equals. When Rome pulled away, right, we didn't pull away. Rome pulled away. When Rome pulled away, now Constantinople became the first among equals. Why? New Rome, right? It was given that title. It was afforded that from the emperor, from all the other churches, and it grew that way over the centuries. So when we look at our patriarch, we look at our patriarch as the first among equals, and he's viewed as the first among equals. Not everybody buys into that. There's still a lot of politics that are happening in the world, but that's why we have a synod. The patriarchate has a synod, so the patriarch doesn't come out on his own and give edicts and say this is the way it shall be. There is a holy and great synod in Constantinople, made up of metropolitans and others, and so on and so forth. In the United States, we have a holy eparchial synod. So the archbishop is the chair of the eparchial synod. On it are the metropolitans, right? So there's 9 of them in total. And when decisions are made, of course, in line with the mother church, they are made with one voice. The Exarch, who is our archbishop, is that voice because he is the representative of the patriarch in America, right? But it's all part of a broad discussion. Now, just out of interest, the filioque clause, we didn't even talk about that. So fathers mentioned this a number of times. When we say our creed and we say who proceeds from the Father and together with the Father and the Son is worshipped and glorified, that's in the original Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed. And that creed was codified, I will say, between the 2 first ecumenical councils, in both. We all believe that. Fast forward now, and the Latins have changed that over time and leading into the Schism years and beyond. And they say, who proceeds from the Father and the Son, right? And there are liturgical reasons why we don't believe that to be the case. You have one God, right? You can't have the Holy Spirit proceed from 2 separate deities, right? You proceed from one deity. But that was a big deal that Orthodoxy just would not accept. So they call it now the Apostles' Creed. It's not the original Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed that we follow. I'm going very superficial here, Father, but it is a big topic. So, at least the nice thing is, as the centuries has progressed, in the next millennium, in the mid-60s, Pope Paul VI and Patriarch Athenagoras, who was mentioned in the video, Athenagoras the Great, came together and actually lifted those bulls of excommunication. So we are not excommunicated from each other with the Catholics. We're not in communion, but we lifted the anathemas, as we say, right? So the anathema is the condemnation, the official, the formal condemnation. Those thankfully don't exist. And there's a path that both the church in the West and the church in the East have started taking over the years to try and reconcile some of our differences, right? And come closer together to become one Christian church. So we already talked about the splitting of the Pentarchy. I should have advanced to that, yeah. Okay. We talked about that. Okay, so how big are we? Roughly about 300 million people worldwide. That doesn't sound like a big number on the one hand when you think that the Roman Catholics are in the billion range. On the other hand, it sounds like a very big number. But half of that is the Church of Russia. The church, I'll show you a slide in a moment that shows you the different Orthodox churches. So our Christian church, our Orthodox, there's 15 self-governing autocephalous and patriarchal churches. So each church has its own head and functions as its own administrative body. It retains its independence, but it's committed to unity of faith and worship. And those churches are what you see Moscow and Constantinople in 2018, 2019. It didn't last that long, but I would say that we are officially, religiously still in communion with each other, but the Russian church still advises its people not to necessarily have anything to do with the Greek Orthodox Church coming out of Constantinople. The Church of Ukraine is the most recent, and you can see all of the other churches. So the Patriarch, certainly through the guidance of the Holy Spirit, but with the input and the consensus that comes from the Holy and Great Synod, makes the decision as to who to grant autocephaly to. So any questions, Marino?
Yeah. So you were saying that the Pope is infallible and our Patriarch...
The Catholics view the Pope to be infallible.
Yeah, and our Patriarch also makes decisions But does he make his decisions through a group of people or?
The Synod. So the Holy and Great Synod. So the Holy and Great Synod, and I don't know all the members, but there are members from all of the archdioceses and metropolises under the Patriarchate. So you'll have representation from the United States, right? You'll have representation from Australia, from Canada, from Great Britain, from other parts of Europe. There are parts of the Church of Greece. So the Church of Greece is an autocephalous church, but not all of Greece falls under the Archdiocese of Greece. There's, Crete falls under the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Some of the Dodekanisai, I think, fall under the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Athos is a direct monastery of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. So there are representatives. And I don't know, Father, I don't know if you know how many people there are, how many hierarchs there are on the Holy and Great Synod. There's a number of them.
It rotates every year.
It does.
But the number,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know the number. But anyway, so it's a discussion. And there has to be consensus. That doesn't mean unanimity, right? This is what we talk about when we talk, with our parish councils. You don't have to have unanimity, but you do need to have consensus. Right?
And,
Dora.
just to clarify, so the Catholics, I don't think, the way I've read about it in the seminary, the Catholics don't believe that the Pope speaks ex cathedra all the time. There are times where ex cathedra means from the throne. So there's times where he's like talking to anybody. The Catholics don't believe that is infallible. But if he sits on the throne and makes a declaration on behalf of the Catholic Church, they believe that is infallible. So we're talking about, it's not just any decision that's made. So but yes, George is correct that the Orthodoxy has always been conciliar in those kind of things.
Yeah. Thanks, Father. Dora.
Dr. Sinan, are there representatives from the Patriarchate for the Alexandria and Catholic on the synods?
No, because it's right. They're their own patriarchates. Father's right. They're their own. No.
So there are some decisions that we make that are not involved in the
Correct. Yeah.
I have a question.
Penelope, yes.
So in regards to the Church of Greece, before 1850, where did Greece fall under? The Patriarch or Alexandria or Jerusalem?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. Do you know the answer to that, Father? I want to say the Patriarchate,
Keep
but...
in mind that after Greece was liberated, it didn't all get liberated all at once.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why there's some,
Yeah.
I think church, I don't know.
I think Mount Athos was always, separate.
It was always.
Because it was
Yeah.
independent and
Yeah.
no matter who the government
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Church of Greece came under the Patriarchate when it was liberated. But
Yeah.
I'm going to say, my guess would be no. Kira Petro, do you know?
I don't, but I know for sure that not all Greece was liberated in 1821.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It took many, many years to
Yes.
actually bring in
Yes.
the rest of the components of Greece.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this is why you see the Church of Greece was granted autocephaly in 1850. That's about 30 years after the 1821 liberation. And prior to that, for 400 years, we were, the whole region was under Ottoman rule. So who had oversight? I would have to say the Ecumenical Patriarchate, but I don't know that as historical fact.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so let's play Name That Hierarch. Okay, so who knows the gentleman on the left? What's that? Pope Francis. Okay, is it fair to say that everybody knows Pope Francis? Who recognizes the gentleman on the right? Is there anybody that doesn't recognize the gentleman on the right? Okay. All right. So I ask this question because it is a sad truth that many of our faithful, and particularly our young folks, do not know the hierarch on the right. And the hierarch on the right is His All Holiness Bartholomew, the Archbishop of Constantinople, New Rome, our ecumenical patriarch. That's his official title. So I get choked up when I say this because shame on us. Shame on us for not teaching ourselves. Father, unfortunately, I didn't hear today's sermon, but I heard last week's sermon. And I heard in his sermon, or not his sermon, but his closing remarks, when he talked about education and how important adult education is. And we do a great job here. Unfortunately, that's not true everywhere. And a lot of people don't know who our hierarch is, who our patriarch is. So here he is. Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, Archbishop of Constantinople and New Rome. He is the 269th successor to St. Andrew, making him the 270th Archbishop of Constantinople. Pope Francis is, I want to say, the 265th successor to St. Peter. We have the Exarch of the Ecumenical Patriarchate here in America, Archbishop Epiphylax of America. So Exarch means representative, basically, right? And his official title is His Eminence Archbishop Epiphylax of America, Most Honorable Exarch of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. And he is the 8th Archbishop of America that's been elected since the establishment of the Archdiocese here in 1922. And I think many of you have met the Archbishop or have had the pleasure to meet the Archbishop. I think many of you know that the Archbishop visited here with His Eminence of Blessed Memory, Bishop Anthony, Metropolitan Anthony, back in 2004. I think it was before our time here, but I think it was 2004. And he was a deacon at the time. So there's a connection to our parish. Now, let's go back to our Patriarch for a moment. So I don't know if any of you remember that there was an interview that was done in 2009 with Bob Simon on 60 Minutes. Iconic interview. Actually really opened up the knowledge that the broader world had of orthodoxy and the plight of the ecumenical patriarchate. So, Bob Simon in that interview said, do you, All Holiness, feel sometimes that you are being crucified? And there was a pause, and the answer was, yes, I do. And then all the media all over the world actually grabbed on that, right? And said, oh my goodness, the Patriarch, the leader of these 300 million, Christians, believes that he's crucified in his own country, where Christendom, Orthodox Christendom is rooted. So that shined a light on a lot of the things that were happening with the Patriarch himself and with the Patriarchate. Now, we're not here to bash anybody, but I will tell you that this is a scatter plot, and don't worry, it's a whole bunch of colors. You can't necessarily see everything on it. It's a scatter plot of religious restrictions around the world, and the y-axis, the vertical axis, is social hostility, and the x-axis, the horizontal, is government restriction. So Turkey is what's circled, what you see in front of you there. High on social hostility and high on government restriction. Despite the Treaty of Lausanne that was signed in 1922 or 1923, when Turkey itself became a democracy, I put that in air quotes, which was supposed to afford religious freedoms to anyone and everyone. I mean, if you look at the constitution of the government of Turkey, it actually tells you that they are supposed to afford religious freedoms to everyone. And they don't, by virtue of the way that they manage what their view is of the minorities that are in Turkey. And it's not only limited to the Orthodox. It's true of certain sects of Muslims as well. So if you're not one of the majority Muslims and you're a minority Muslim, you also face certain religious restrictions. Now, if you go back to 1910, the Greek Orthodox population in Constantinople numbered roughly 20%. So 1910, right? Before the Treaty of Lausanne, before a lot of the hostilities that have been experienced took place. Does anybody want to guess what that number is today? Number of Greek Orthodox in Constantinople. I don't know the number, but percentage-wise, do you want to?
2%.
Okay. Okay, whoever said less than 1, if I had a prize, you would get the prize. Okay, so Dr. Liu, it's absolutely 0.017%. Today's population. Now, I wish I knew what that number was in actual numbers. It's in the thousands. It's not in the tens of thousands. It's not in the hundreds of thousands. It's in the thousands. And there's a small, very devout Orthodox community that looks after the Fanar and looks after themselves. And they have neighborhoods, and you'll see a little bit. You might see a little bit in a video we have later on. But this is what's happening. And in that Bob Simon interview, in that 2009 interview, and for those of you, by the way, that have not seen that interview, look it up on YouTube. Just do a search. 60 Minutes, Patriarch Bartholomew. It's a phenomenal interview. His All Holiness's words in that interview. We are a small Christian drop in a vast Muslim ocean. Right? Yet God's grace has deigned for us to survive. So he actually also made a statement, and I don't remember if that statement was in this interview or if it was sometime later, but the statement was, this is the continuation of Jerusalem. For us, it is equally a holy and sacred land. We prefer to stay here even if crucified sometimes, because it is the gospel, it is written that it is given to us not only to believe in Christ, but also to suffer for Christ. So, very poignant words. I mean, if you stop and you think about that, because a lot of people have said, well, why don't you just pack up and move? I mean, who cares? You're in a hostile city, you're in a hostile country, go to Greece, go to Athos, establish yourself somewhere else. No, right? This is where we were founded. This is Holy Land. Okay, so on your chairs when you came in, you noticed that I had given you some brochures. Don't read them now. We're going to go through them very quickly on screen here. And I had given you some cards. The cards, by the way, are a phenomenal creation from one of our brother Archons. They're called Rocky cards. We call them Rocky cards. His name is Rocky, Rocky Sisson, a great Archon. And he developed, they're little speaking point cards, right? And I was given these when I went to New York for Archon weekend. I have them in my pocket all the time. There's little elevator pitch comments on them, but there's interesting facts. So when someone asks you, what does it mean to be Greek Orthodox? What do you tell me something about Hagia Sophia. Tell me something about your Patriarch. I don't know anything. You just pull out a card, right? You can refer to the card. So they're yours. Enjoy them. Use them to teach others, right? Both within our faith and outside our faith. The little booklet talks about the 5 major issues of impact that Constantinople is facing, and that the Archons have their focus on to work to try and resolve. The first is the lack of legal personality. And our national commander, Archon Dr. Anthony Limberakis, mentioned this, right? If you have no existence, if in the eyes of the government you don't exist, how can you get anything done? Who do you complain to? It makes it that much easier for the government to take properties away from you. It makes it that much more difficult for you to go and say, I expect to have my properties returned to me. If you want to travel, to leave the country, if you have visiting hierarchs, I don't know if anyone's ever noticed, but when our Archbishop and other metropolitans go and they're walking among the public, they're in suits, right? When do you ever see that, right? You don't see that, but they have to do that, right? Now, this leads into other things, which we'll talk about in a minute. So government interference in the selection of the ecumenical patriarchate. So the way, a lot of people are familiar with the Roman Catholic view, the conclave, a pope passes away, the cardinals all get together, they go into the Sistine Chapel, they lock themselves up, and they go and do their vote. And if you get black smoke, you don't have a new one, and if you get white smoke, you do have a new one. We don't have that, but there is a vote. There is a vote that takes place. The synod gets together, and there are candidates that are put forward. And that's part of the whole apostolic succession that we talked about. So you have Christ, you have St. Andrew. And the patriarch is the representative, is the extension of that apostolic succession, is part of that apostolic succession. So when you have the government that now says to you, no, you can't put your list forward until I've reviewed it and until I've approved it. And there have been names that have been crossed off the list. Now, what does the government of not only Turkey but any country, but Turkey in specific in this case, what do they know about these people? If some of these people have been outspoken, if some of these people whom they may have known as metropolitans of the throne or proto-presbyters of the throne, sorry, it wouldn't be a proto-presbyter, it would be like an archimandrite of the throne. So if they've known these people, if these people have a reputation for speaking out against some of the things that we're talking about now, they would get crossed off the list. When Athenagoras, those of you that are old enough to remember, and certainly before my time, but when Athenagoras, who was the Archbishop of America, North and South America, became Patriarch, it was at the intervention of the then president, who I believe was Harry S. Truman, who actually put him on one of the Air Force Ones, Air Force Twos, Air Force Threes, whatever it was, and sent him directly to Constantinople with directions to the government not to intervene, right? So this is how our government has gotten involved in the past to prevent some of these interventions from the government of Turkey from taking place. Now, if I heard some of my brother Archons correctly from other presentations, our current Patriarch, His All Holiness Bartholomew, when that list went forward, nobody was struck off that list. And I don't know how much discussion or intervention was required for that to happen, but I had heard that to be the case. And our current Patriarch has been the longest serving Patriarch in the history of the Patriarchate. I think he's on 33 years now. So he's the longest serving Patriarch we've had. So third issue, the forcible closure of Halki. So Halki is the seminary of the Patriarchate, if you will. This is, that's what it looks like. It's in the Prince's Islands in Turkey. There have been a number of bishops, a number of priests, and then bishops, and then metropolitans, and I think about a dozen of them have even made it to become patriarchs over the years. This was forcibly closed in 1971 as a institute of higher learning because the government of Turkey squashed all that stuff. It operates as a monastery today. There is oversight from our Patriarchate. You can go and visit it for those of you that might be planning a trip. And I've never been. By God's blessing, I will get to go there at some point. From what I've seen, it's beautiful, but it's been closed for 52 years. And we are fighting. We, the Archons. Presbytera, it is beautiful, isn't it?
And also they have the desks, just like the students attending right now.
Right.
Everything is ready to go to class.
Yeah, it's ready to go. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a shame. We hear about our own seminary here, not to diminish any importance from our seminary, Hellenic College Holy Cross. Very important because this is where our current and our future priests are coming from. But from the great Mother Church as a whole, right, to have this seminary closed for 52 years where you cannot produce clergy, Orthodox clergy. It's not the only one, but it's the historic one.
Bishop Anthony and Father Chris Manidakis that was here.
There you go. Yeah. So the monastery, the theological school had been in operation for 127 years. It graduated 1,000 students in that 127 years. 330 of them became bishops. And I don't have the next slide that tells you how many became patriarchs, but I want to say 12. I think that number jumps out at me. Anyway, it's either 12 or 15. So anyhow, you can see that it's a tragedy and it's something that the Archons are working to address. And I'll tell you in a few minutes how we're working to address all of these things. The fourth item of concern is that we cannot buy, sell, or inherit property as a church, as an ecumenical patriarchate. Now, the first item of concern is that we have no legal identity. Well, if you have no legal identity, how can you buy, sell, or inherit property? And if you look, back in 1936, the Patriarchate had roughly 8,000 properties. Okay? By 1999, that number had dropped to around 2,000 properties. And today, we have less than 500 properties. There's less than 500 properties today. Okay? Now, yes?
I just was going to add to that.
Go ahead.
It's very interesting because at this Archon weekend in New York, they were saying, specifically here with the properties, that as the properties start, breaking down or needing improvements, they have to go to the government to get permits, licenses to fix their buildings. And what happens is the government says you don't have any legal, you're not allowed here, you have no legal standing, and they don't grant them the permits to fix the buildings fall into disrepair, and then the government snatches them.
Thank you. I mean, so our national commander would be so proud that my wife is actually participating. Thank you very much. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Presbytera.
About 30 years or something ago, I was reading that they were planning to move everything from the Patriarchate to Patmos Island because they didn't want to lose all their treasures because they were stealing them. But I haven't heard anything.
That's interesting. I haven't heard anything either, Presbytera. But that's an interesting, fun fact that I will check into. I hadn't heard. I think if that had happened, we would have heard something. But I hadn't heard it. Yeah. I will say that in 2004, this is somewhat of an aside, in 2004 or 2008, the relics of St. John Chrysostom and St. Gregory the Theologian were finally returned to their formal resting place back in Constantinople, and they're in, I want to say, the Patriarchal Church of St. George. They were at the Vatican in Rome since the sacking, I want to say, in the Fourth Crusade, and they were returned. But I haven't heard about artifacts and liturgical items being moved. But it's research for me. Sorry, someone else had a question. Penelope?
Yeah, can you elaborate for a second on the Orthodox Christian people who live in Constantinople? Do they have Turkish passports?
They do, and actually, that's a great question. So they're
all the religious people who live there, the less than 1%.
Yeah.
Do we know what is their status as far as, are they citizens of Turkey?
They are.
Are they visitors?
They are. They're citizens of, there may be visitors, but they are citizens of Turkey. They've always been citizens of Turkey. Historically, they've been citizens of Constantinople, right? Istanbul, right? They've been citizens there for generations. And there are families that haven't left and have been there for centuries. They are Greek Orthodox. They are Turkish citizens. The clergy that is there, or actually, I shouldn't say the clergy. One of the requirements to become patriarch is that you must be a Turkish citizen. So our patriarch is from Imbros initially, right? There was, I don't know what to call it. There was an open period that I think maybe the government of Turkey had allowed a number of years ago, maybe in the 90s, maybe in the early 2000s, where people could come into Turkey and get their Turkish citizenship. And we had a lot of our metropolitans and other bishops around the world that went to Turkey to become, because you have to secure the future of the patriarchate. And so if you squash it and you only have 3 people that are qualified and Turkish citizens, then how do you ensure the continuation of the Apostolic See of St. Andrew? That goes beyond your question, but yes, they are Greek Orthodox. They're called Rum. They're called the Rum, R-U-M. Right.
There's a loophole where they tell them, they say that they have no legal identity on religious grounds.
Well, the Patriarchate has no legal identity. I think those people as citizens have identity, but that doesn't mean that they're not religiously persecuted. Carly.
On the note of continuing, where are seminarians going if they can't go to the... That would have been the
other seminaries, and I don't know where all the other seminaries. I've heard that a number of seminaries have also closed in Greece, but there are other seminaries in Europe, in other parts of the world. They have to go elsewhere. Yeah. Dora.
Looking at that slide, are you saying that we were better off all those years under the Ottoman rule than we are, after 1936 and beyond?
So I would never say that. I would never, because nobody wants to be oppressed. And it was one type of oppression when you were under Ottoman rule, and now it's another type of oppression, but it's oppression nonetheless, right? So there certainly wasn't religious freedom when you were under Ottoman rule, but the church existed and it was allowed to continue, right? So the church didn't fold just because we were under Ottoman rule. It was a very vibrant church. We had patriarchs and the church practiced, and that didn't mean that there weren't dangers associated with it. Here we live in a modern democracy, and we're in a country that espouses to be a democratic country, right? Founded under the principles of Kemal Ataturk, right? And the Treaty of Lausanne. And it's not behaving that way. And this is part of the problem, right? This is part of the problem. So when you look at what's happening in the background, what the Archons are doing by using their, I will say, connections, using their relationships with political bodies, with human rights organizations, reminding the world that these human rights abuses are taking place. Things move slowly for the Turkish government, right? They don't get to move as quickly as they like, because people do stand up and take notice. We're not where we need to be, but these are the efforts that we continue. I'm not saying it's only the Archons, because we have the Archons in the United States, the Order of St. Andrew. Canada has its Archons, Australia has its Archons, Greece has its Archons. There are other Archons that are invested directly by His All Holiness. Everyone works for these purposes, to ensure the religious freedoms that we should all be afforded. So I'm not saying it was better. I'm saying that over the modern age, certainly in the 20th century, we have seen certainly a dilution of our freedoms, right? Casey.
I've read that it's almost impossible to build a church in Turkey.
Well,
and they don't forbid it, but they kind of like the game with the permits. They do so much take that it never actually is allowed to build.
Exactly. So that's an excellent segue to this slide, because not only is it difficult to build, but they're taking our churches and they're converting them to mosques, right? And you're absolutely right. If you have no legal identity, how do you get a permit to build something, right? Everybody knows the story of Hagia Sophia. So Hagia Sophia was operating as a neutral museum pretty much since the 1930s. And it was converted to a mosque by Erdogan in July of 2020. And you know, the ironic thing is that July 24th, it was the 97th anniversary of the signing of the Treaty of Lausanne. So it's almost as if the president of Turkey was thumbing his nose at the signing of the treaty by doing this on that date. All right, and you know, this is what the ancient iconography looks like. Part of the ancient iconography looks like on the dome at Hagia Sophia, pre-turning it into a mosque, and this is what they've done to it now. All right. All right. So the iconography is there; it's just hidden from view. Right, and Hagia Sophia is not the only one. You look at the Church of the Holy Savior in Chora, right? That has now been renamed the Caria Mosque, and that also happened in 2020, just shortly after Hagia Sophia. And you look at the iconography that's in that church, right? And you look at the beautiful iconography in the hallways. Look at the picture on the left and look at the picture on the right. It's all been covered, right? George.
When did Hagia Sophia stop being a church, stop being used as a church?
So, I mean, Hagia Sophia really was used as a church from the time of Justinian, so the 6th century. I think it was built in 500 something, if I'm not mistaken, Father. And I think it was the seat of Christianity, really, until the Latins sacked it in the 13th century, and then for a period of about 60 years. So I think the Fourth Crusade was 1204, 1205. When it was taken over, it was turned into a Catholic church, and about 60 years later, it went back to being an Orthodox church until 1453 when the Ottomans came in, and then that's when it stopped being a church. And then it never became a church again. I don't believe it ever became a church again. I believe after the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the Treaty of Lausanne in the early 1920s, it was dedicated as a neutral museum. So people could still go in, you could view it, you could do, you know, but there were no liturgical services.
You were not allowed, visitors were not allowed to pray.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
We went on the group of the seminary, and we're standing on like this parapet very close to that La Pitera that you just showed earlier. And we started chanting Keep Maho, and we were told to stop. There were some security guards who told us to stop chanting.
Yeah, it's sad.
And we were very, very quiet in the room.
It's sad. I mean, imagine that, right? I mean, we take so many things, I said we take many things for granted in this country. Imagine someone comes to you and says, you can't be displaying your cross. Oh, you can't make the sign of the cross. Oh, we can hear you chanting under your breath. You can't be doing that. I mean, imagine someone coming and saying those things to you. Okay. The fifth and final thing, oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask, is there any active churches in Turkey besides Panari that they have liturgy every Sunday?
Okay.
I want to say a couple of them, Fiesco has active. I think there are churches around. I think that because this is such an important site that the Turks have taken a special But yeah, no, there's active churches.
Okay, and the fifth item is no ecumenical status, right? So the Patriarchate has held the title ecumenical since the 6th century, roughly. I mean, prior to that, it was referred to as ecumenical. It was viewed as being ecumenical. So ecumenical really means ecumenici, wholly inhabited, inhabiting the whole of the earth, I think, is the entirety. So the entirety of Christian unity really is, I think, what it's intended to mean, right? And you hear some people today and they say, oh, I don't like this whole thing of ecumenism because they don't necessarily like Orthodoxy making moves to bring the Western Church closer, or for the Eastern Church to be moving closer to the Western Church. The way we really need to look at it is, look, we're Christians. We believe in the same God. We believe in the same Jesus Christ. He's our Lord and Savior. And it's a shame that these things happened centuries ago, a millennia ago. And if we can bring our church back and unite our church, right? Now, there's politics involved in all that stuff. But God bless the Patriarchate for holding the title ecumenical. So since the 6th century, I think it was more codified in the 6th century, where people really started not only referring to it, but in writing, in codification, the ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, right? And His All Holiness, by God's grace, has made amazing strides at really behaving ecumenically, embracing the popes of Rome, embracing the fact that we all stem from Jesus Christ. The apostles were brothers. And you may all have seen it, and you can find YouTube videos on this. They embrace each other. The first time Bartholomew, His All Holiness, met with, probably it would have been John Paul II, I want to say, at the time, right? It was an embrace. And an icon had been presented, if not between those two, then certainly between our patriarch and one of the latter popes. An icon had been depicted of Saints Peter and Andrew embracing each other, because Saints Peter and Andrew were brothers. So this is what we're working toward. Okay? But the Turkish government does not recognize, the Turkish government views the Patriarchate as a local church. They're there to serve the local Orthodox population. That's how they're viewed officially. They may refer to them by the ecumenical title from time to time, because the rest of the world refers to them, but officially they're not viewed as ecumenical. Okay? So what are the Archons doing in the U.S.? And I'm going to blast through these fairly quickly. What are the Archons doing in the U.S. and internationally to address all of these issues? Well, there is a U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Turkey is on that list consistently. Other countries are as well. So we monitor these things, and we have discussions with local officials. We bring awareness, right, through marketing efforts, through political contact efforts to all levels of the federal government. There are state initiatives that are put forward, and I want to say the timing here is around 2019 or 2020. 58 resolutions have been passed in 46 states on religious freedoms. So that's a plus. Now, the question is, well, what does that do? Well, it brings awareness, right? I mean, it's not like the state of, Georgia passing a religious freedoms initiative, carries specific weight. But when 46 out of 50 states, and it could even be more now, or it might be all 50 at some point, when they pass religious freedom initiatives, people stand up and they take notice, right? The Archons, have put together these awards. They're not to honor ourselves. They're to honor people who have done great things in the assistance of the Patriarchate. And in that early video, you saw awards being presented to then Vice President Joe Biden, to a number of other dignitaries, right? I think Nelson Mandela was on that list. I want to say that Bishop Desmond Tutu of blessed memory was on that list. So these are people that have advanced religious freedoms around the world, and that's what we're doing as Archons, is to bring awareness and to make sure we reflect religious freedoms. The Burris Award is more to honor an Archon that's done an extraordinary job within the Patriarchate. George Marcus is a name that you may all know from the Bay Area. He was honored just this past year for his contributions to the order. The Archon group itself, I mean, it is an order, and there are engagement committees, and we're all expected to join an engagement committee. There's 10 of them. There's a variety of different things that those committees do, from political to educational, like what I'm doing right now. There's participation in academic symposia, so on and so forth. So our Archons are very active in a number of different areas, and they bring their talents forward. Bringing awareness to European leaders. Father mentioned this when he mentioned Archon Fanis Economidis, who, by the way, I will say that if it wasn't for Archon Fanis Economidis, I would not have been involved at the metropolis level or the archdiocesan level, and I certainly would not have been invested as an Archon. So he holds a special place in my heart, just like just like our brother Fawaz holds a special place in my heart. And he's still with us. Archon Finis is still with us. And yes, he is facing some challenges, health challenges. So even though you may not know him, include him in your prayers for his suffering to be taken away in whichever way God deems best. But these are the organizations that we bring awareness to, and OSCE is the Warsaw activity that takes place every year, where Archon Finis had gone to, and we sent Archon Judge Stephen Kunelis. Some of you may know the name. His mother is still the organist in Oakland. So he has represented us these past 2 years, along with Archon Rocky Sisson, who produced the cards that I mentioned. And, there have been historic visits over the years. In 2011, 2014, Biden, as the first sitting vice president, was the first one to visit the ecumenical patriarchate as a sitting leader. And I'm not going to let this whole thing go. It's long and we've been here for a while, but there have been numerous historic meetings. I might fast forward a little bit here. It's a lot about the then vice president visiting the ecumenical patriarchate. We host and hold international conferences on religious freedom. There have been 3 so far. The 4th one is coming up in May of this year in Athens. That is also going to be followed immediately by the first Archon conference, the first global Archon conference. So there will be Archons there from Canada, Australia, Europe, and other parts of the world. And by God's grace, Christine and I will be able to go there. That's the plan. We'll see what happens. You heard about the Bartholomew Foundation. This is the endowment for the Patriarchate that was started really only a few years ago. I want to say maybe 4 or 5 years ago. They have raised in pledges over $23 million. Now, I don't know what the ultimate goal is. Nobody's going to say no to additional pledges. You know that we're working on our own project here. These things are important where people are moved. And they feel that they want to support the church in a variety of different levels and in a variety of different ways. If you know anything about endowments, you hold on to the principal and you use the interest, right? And $23 million at even a 3% or a 4% rate of return provides a really, really good amount for the, per year, provides a really good amount for the Patriarchate to be able to sustain itself. And this was named in honor of His All Holiness Bartholomew because he's been the longest serving Patriarch. So at this point in time, it was only 30 years. I think he's up to 33 years now. And the mission of the foundation is to provide economic independence in perpetuity, right? So that's it. We've come to the end of the presentation. You've been here for almost an hour and a half. I'm very grateful. There are resources that you can look at. I'm here, so I'm your resource. I'm a member of our family. So come and talk to me anytime you like. And I will leave you with, this is a short 3-minute video, because this is the next, I'm going to pause this for a moment, because I want to introduce this. So this is the next initiative and the current initiative. So this is called the Pilgrimage of Discovery. We don't really have a lot of young adults here. We have a few, and God bless you for being here. Spread the word, right, to your friends. The Pilgrimage of Discovery is a pilot program that was started last year in 2023, where 5 young adults were chosen from the metropolis of Chicago to go and visit the Patriarchate, really to introduce our faith and all of the things that I've talked to you about to our young adults, and to have them come back and be ambassadors and be able to then take the reins and educate people into the future of our church. That program is now going national. I haven't seen the application period yet, but it's going to open very shortly. And it's going to be a selection of 14 people across the nation. And the Archons are paying for all of it. 3 minutes and we're at the end. So I'll just show you this.
The Pilgrimage of Discovery is a wonderful opportunity for the faithful of all ages to explore their spiritual roots. Connect with fellow believers in these historical lands, enriching the lives of those who embark upon it, and deepen their understanding of the Orthodox faith.
Jesus says we have to enter by the narrow gate. in the narrow way, and it's difficult, and few will find life, and you go through that narrow tunnel, and you have that life-giving water.
This feels like a pilgrimage.
A lot of times when people ask, like, why do you believe? I feel like it's places like these that sometimes I go to and remember. It's like, this is a place of healing. This is a place of the reason why a lot of us turn to our faith for strength and for guidance. And so just hearing stories about how people have restored health and restored eyesight, I mean, I don't really have any words other than just an amazing feeling that I just experienced.
One of our young adults said after he left the Halki Seminary, now that I've been here, I feel responsible for this place. This is the connection we want to make with our young adults to the Patriarchate, to Constantinople.
I don't think that anybody who comes to this city, today's Istanbul, historically the world's Constantinople, leaves untouched by it, leaves forgetting it. I don't think anybody who comes to this city leaves unchanged by virtue of time spent here.
Whoop. Sorry, wrong one. And that's it. That's it for me today. I'm happy to take more questions. We can do it unofficially afterwards. Yes, Connie?
So when they were going through that tunnel, is that St. Sophia?
I'm not sure where it is. I'll be honest with you. I've never been to Constantinople. That's something I intend to change very soon. But
when they got out, there were icons still there.
There were. I mean, it could have been Hagia Sophia. I don't think it was Hagia Sophia. I don't think that it could have been.
There is another church that is kind of closed down and you can't see much other than a couple of walls with pictures. And I think that's where the tunnel is.
Okay. Thank you, Presbytera.
Huh?
Have you ever gone?
Not through the tunnel, but I did yes. I went with Bishop Nikitas, and it was a really nice tour.
Very nice. Lou?
Why is Turkey sort of left into an Eastern stranglehold? From their point of view, why are they...
You know, I wish I knew the answer to that. I wish I knew the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if it's a fear. You know, they don't want to have a Vatican on their hands. They don't want to actually see a resurgence. You know, Erdogan himself, I will tell you, really wants to bring back the days of Ottoman rule. It's very similar to Putin really wanting, having a nostalgia, not for communist Russia, but for the Russia of Peter the Great, right? And I think Erdogan is very similar in that respect, right? Very, you know, very rooted in that Islamic view, right? But it's a great question. Right? Yes, Matt.
Are the Archons working with the U.S. government to leverage or block the Turkish acceptance into the EU?
I'm sure that discussions are happening. So I can't speak to that with knowledge because I don't know. I haven't been involved in any of those conversations. But look, let me tell you, there's been a lot of engagement over the years and in recent years with Mike Pompeo. There's been a lot of engagement with Reince Priebus. Reince Priebus, by the way, is Greek, and he's an Archon of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Yes. So there's been a lot of engagement there. We have Archons. We have an Archon who is the current ambassador of the United States to Greece. So there are Archons in high political places. I have to believe all those conversations are taking place. And it's not from the standpoint of penalizing anybody. It's from the standpoint of allowing us to have our religious freedoms. Penelope, were you going to say something?
I wanted to say that it's very interesting that 2020, when they closed Hagia Sophia, even people of UNESCO, because Hagia Sophia was a World Heritage Site, they couldn't do anything. It was, you know, there were so many people who tried to have the Turkish government not do that, but they were not successful. So that gives you an idea how much control the Turkish government
Yes,
has.
yes. And look, it's a very sensitive, everybody understands it's a very sensitive, I'm not just speaking from an Orthodox standpoint now. From a global standpoint, you have a nation that is a member of NATO, and you're limited in how much you can do. You can influence, you can stall, you can try and steer, you know, we're not trying to overthrow anybody, but at some point there will be a change in government. And hopefully that change in government will bring a change in attitudes and a change in views. And we'll see. Not in the United States. I'm talking about Turkey.
Which committees did you say that you are actively working with?
So you know, you have to put your hand up and you know, and say that you can be on some committees. So I've asked to be on the Parish and Metropolis Education Committee. That's not the reason why I'm doing this. I mean, I'm doing this because this is my home parish and I want to talk to all of you about this stuff. But I expect that there will be more of these things that they will ask of me to do. I'm also on, I also volunteered myself to be on an international Archon committee, because one of the things the Archons are trying to do now is have closer engagement with other global Archons. And thankfully, because I've been so busy, no one's contacted me for that yet. But that's something that I've also asked to be on. Yes. Yes, yes. Archondisa, Archondisa. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, I was blessed a few years back to listen to Patriarch Bartholomew's All Holiness speaking about Turkey and the sort of the history that he had with the political leaders. And, you know, it's very interesting because he said, of course, under Erdogan, how difficult it's been to even try to work with the government, whereas the previous people that he worked with were willing to listen and speak and have that open communication. So really just the politics of it getting bogged down and why the Archons are so crucial to try and put more political pressure on the government of Turkey to try and you know, release this stranglehold they have.
Absolutely true. There are other presentations with many more slides that are really you know, poignant to this conversation. You know, when you really can't appreciate enough how much persecution is taking place. There is a site out there that the Archons have put together called christianpersecution.org or .com, I'm not sure which. You know, Pakistan, Nigeria, a lot of countries in Africa. There's a lot happening on the African continent right now with the Church of Russia, who unfortunately, you know, we're all Orthodox Christians. We believe the same foundational things as all of our other Orthodox brothers and sisters. But the Church of Moscow is really trying to, frankly, recruit people and bring them away from the ecumenical patriarchate and put them under the Church of Moscow on the continent of Africa, and it's sad. So we kind of face a two-front approach here, right? We have the Turkish government, we also have the Russian Church that we're dealing with. And you know, I mean, I've heard presentations from other Archons, our national commander, that have told us that there have been death threats that have been made on His All Holiness's life. The Archons have purchased, I won't call it a Pope mobile, but really an armored vehicle, similar to what, you know, maybe not the beast that the president drives, but something similar to that, for our Patriarch to get around in, because there have been, you know, grenades have been lobbed over, you know, at the Fanar. It's terrible. These are threats. These are threats that exist. Our national commander has told us that he himself cannot go in an official capacity to Turkey because he has been so outspoken that there have been threats on his life. So these are real things that are happening around the world. Yeah, pray for us. Pray for all of us. And thank you very much. Yeah.
I remember about 30 to 35 years ago, the Patriarch before Bartholomew visited Auckland, Ascension. Yes, and you could see on his face the pain from the restrictions. He looked like almost like a saint. I remember that.
Yeah, it's hard. Penelope?
I just want to say if there's going to be any information or trips, not necessarily the documents of discovery for young people, but other trips that maybe are metropolis or they will put together, it would be nice to have something like this and maybe inform as many people as possible.
That's
Seeing with our own eyes.
that's awesome.
Very important.
Totally agree with you. And I do know that the metropolis has talked about doing one of these trips. It's not where it needs to be yet. Some of us who know about the planning keep prodding His Eminence to see how close we are. So I can say with certainty that there will be one. I just don't know when there will be one. And parishes can arrange these things too, and we'll have conversations with Father, and we'll see if we can do something as a parish, and as a group of parishes perhaps, right, with others. So we'll see. I think those are all great things. So look, I've tired you all. I really appreciate your attention. We've gone about an hour and a half, actually exactly an hour and a half. Thank you. Thank you very much.